Good afternoon and welcome to A Parent's Journey with SCID. Joining us today are Heather Smith, Chair of the SCID Compass Steering Committee and Parent-Patient Advisory Board, and founder and president of SCID Angels for Life. Joining us also is Angie Kotarski, mother to Miles, a young man living with a rare form of SCID. Throughout this session, please feel free to ask questions over the chat feature in the Attendee Hub. Welcome, Heather and Angie.
It's great to have this opportunity to talk with you one-on-one and to share his journey with everybody that's attending the summit today. So thank you for taking the time to do that and to demonstrate what it has been like for Miles to experience ZAP70 SCID. So let's start from the beginning, if that's okay with you, and take me back to when you first learned about the word SCID.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to share our story. So Miles, who is now 20 years old, was diagnosed with SCID when he was 10 months old. He first became sick when he was about 4.5 months old. He developed pneumonia and was in the hospital on a ventilator for a couple of weeks. And then after he was able to be discharged and he was doing fairly well, he came home, but he still was getting sick a lot with colds and had chronic thrush. And then when he was 10 months old, he developed pneumonia again and was back in the hospital. And during that time, our pediatrician said, I think that there's something else going on here. So he referred us to an immunologist. And they figured out, thankfully, pretty quickly that he had SCID and he was diagnosed with ZAP70 deficiency. And I hadn't heard of SCID by its proper name. I had heard of The Boy in the Bubble just based on the John Travolta movie from the 70s. And that was the extent of my knowledge. I had zero medical training as far as an educational background. And I was a new mom. I was 22. So this was completely new to me.
I think, especially those of us who have been diagnosed prior to 10 years, because there's been newborn screening for SCID now for the past 10 years. So those of us that were diagnosed prior to that, this journey sounds extremely familiar. But what an astute pediatrician you had that was able to put you in touch with an immunologist as quickly as they did. So that was a real blessing for you guys, for sure, that happened. So you get the diagnosis of SCID. You have no idea, other than watching the movie, really what you're talking about. What did you do to educate yourself about it? Did you start doing some research on the internet? Did you join a support group? Did the doctor's office help you learn all these new terms? And how did that go?
That's a great question. So I did what no doctor wants us to do, but what every parent does. And I referred to Dr. Google, and that was a mistake, but it was also a blessing because I came across this SCID.net support group and I joined the group right away. And I had a mom call me that night and give me her experience, which was, did not end well for that family. And that was tough because that was my very first experience with another parent that had dealt with it. But I joined the group, and that's where I really learned a wealth of information. The doctor's office wasn't super helpful in teaching me about it. I mean, they did what they could. They weren't negligent, but they're there to diagnose and treat, and the education was pretty limited. So we had to decide very quickly in a matter of 2 weeks what we wanted to do and how we wanted to move forward. And so we were thrown into this unknown and having to make a decision on our child's life, which was extremely difficult based on our extremely limited knowledge. We decided to move to a different state to have his treatment, where we learned that there was a doctor there that knew SCID very well and had been a pioneer in SCID for a very long time. So we chose to go that route. We moved out of state, and he had his first transplant from his father there. And he needed a booster about 9 months later. So he was just over a year old when he received his first transplant without chemotherapy. And then 9 months later, he needed a booster from his father, also again without chemotherapy. And he seemed to be doing pretty well. We lived and out of state for about 10 months. Then we moved back home to Indiana. And he seemed to be doing all right for a little bit, but then he started developing these very strange symptoms that really didn't make a lot of sense to us and to the doctors. He would develop these rashes that would just come and go, but they were all over his body. And he developed arthritis bilaterally in his wrists and his ankles, and GI symptoms that were similar to Crohn's disease. So all of those things together, they all started happening at the same time. And the hospital in Indiana was keeping a close eye on him. And then one day we found a lump in his abdomen when he was 3 years old. And we learned then that he had developed lymphoma also in his abdomen. He had 2 tumors, one under his kidney and then one that was wrapped around his intestines. And so then we knew that explained why he was having these other autoimmune type symptoms. It was because the transplant was no longer working.
Wow, that must have been extremely shocking for you and your family, and even for the physicians that you were working with too. I'm sure that really caught them off guard too. But it just goes to show you how important it is to stay in tune with your child, and when something isn't right, not to let it go and go. Even as a new mom, right? Because you don't want to seem like you're, overprotective or anything like that. But and I'm assuming you maybe had a gut feeling. I don't know, maybe you didn't. I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but you do have to follow that gut feeling if you think something's not right, and take them in. So thank goodness that you did do that.
Yeah.
And so he was treated for that. And how did that go for him?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I am a huge advocate of trusting your gut. That is very significant. I really believe that, that is a God-given thing. And we need to follow that. We need to trust that. And if you have a doctor that doesn't work with you, that can be really difficult. We had that. I was questioned a lot about, why do you keep bringing him in? And he's fine. And then a week later, he's not fine. He's diagnosed with lymphoma. So, trust your gut, but I still worked with the doctors. I didn't become volatile or anything. I just was persistent. And as far as the treatment, it was relatively easy. At the time, I would not have said that, but based on what was to come for Miles in the future, looking back, I can say, relatively speaking, it was easy. They kind of toned the chemotherapy down because they didn't want to knock out too much more of his immune system. They were thinking, if we can try to save a little bit of the transplant, then perhaps it will take over and become more robust later, which did not happen. But the treatment was enough that it did get rid of the lymphoma, and he did quite well for a couple of years. He was even able to start kindergarten, which was very exciting and scary at the same time, but he did very well. And we moved states again for work this time, thinking he's doing well, we'll move and we'll kind of start over, if you will. And we moved to Virginia, and he started developing just chronic lung infections. And we would go to the doctor quite frequently and would be told the same thing over and over. He just needs this inhaler or that inhaler, and nothing was ever helping. And I was calling different doctors around the country because I felt in my gut that something wasn't quite right and that he shouldn't be getting sick. And he was getting very sick. I mean, he would come to me and cry that he couldn't breathe. His chest hurt, and it was very scary. And especially to go to the hospital and be told, no, he's fine. So we searched for other doctors, and we went back to Indiana because we learned he was growing some pretty significant infections in his lungs, and he needed IV antibiotics, and he needed to go back on to immunoglobulin therapy. So we started that. And then it was very soon after determined that he would need another transplant, and that this time it would need to be an unrelated transplant with chemotherapy. So that was very devastating. That was very difficult. I think we kind of got comfortable for a couple of years thinking that we were free and clear. He was going to live a normal life. Everything was fine. And we moved to Ohio for treatment there. By this time we had 2 more children. I had my 3rd child was a newborn, and we moved to Ohio for him to be treated at Cincinnati. We were getting ready, preparing for his next transplant with the unrelated donor, and going through all the scans to make sure his organs were, healthy enough to go through treatment, and make sure also that those bacteria, that lung infection had cleared in order for him to be eligible for a transplant. And as we were doing that, just kind of in the middle of all of that preparation, he woke up one morning and he said, "Mom, I have a bump on my neck and it hurts really bad." So I felt it, and it was a little lump, but it moved and it was soft. And I thought, well, they say that's supposed to be fine, right? If it's movable and it's soft, it's fine. But I just felt sick about it. And at this point, I really questioned whether or not my intuition had been tainted based on all of the bad things that had happened. But I took him to the doctor anyway. And I suspect they probably had labs that made them suspicious of lymphoma again, because they tested it immediately. And he did, in fact, have lymphoma again for a second time. He was 9 years old. And we had to put the transplant on hold, and he needed to be treated for the lymphoma again. And this time that treatment was extremely difficult. It was very tough on him. Just the medication was harder. They really doubled down on it since it was the second time he had had it. And also his age, he was 9 years old, and that's not an easy age to be sitting in a hospital for as long as he did. So the doctor treated the lymphoma. And while it was rough, he did well. And the lymphoma went away, and we went immediately into transplant. He was transplanted with a young man named Jochen in Germany. Miles received his cells when he was 10 years old, and he ended up needing 2 boosters, which are more cells from the same donor. But so the first time the first transplant that he got from this unrelated donor, he did have to do more chemotherapy even after the lymphoma treatment. And then he received the transplant from the unrelated donor. And then with the 2 subsequent donations that he received from that donor, he did not need more chemotherapy. He just received those cells.
And with that transplant, I'm assuming you said chemotherapy, so I'm assuming at his age of 9, 10 years old, he lost his hair. Is that correct?
He did. He lost his hair. He developed mouth sores. He lost a lot of weight.
And did I see that the family, in support of him, that you and your husband chose to shave your heads too? Is that correct?
We did. We had a big head shaving party. Neighbors came. Both grandmas shaved their heads. My mom my sister also shaved her head. We had, I think, a total of 43 people. that shaved their head in solidarity with Miles to show their support. And that was very moving. Community was such a huge part of Miles and our family being able to get through this. So
Yeah,
it might seem minor, but it was significant.
Oh no, God, that seems huge to me. I'm in awe. I'm definitely in awe of the willingness of even just you and your husband to do it, because it's our hair is our security blanket, right? So, and how what that must have meant to him to see you guys do that, but then to have the community behind him too. Wow, that's just super powerful, super powerful.
I hope it helped. He was very upset about losing his hair because it was coming out in chunks. And I said, I think it'd be better for you to shave it. It would be less stressful than just it coming out, so we tried to make it fun, as fun as it can be. And he was still upset, but I do think just having everyone do it instead of just him was probably helpful. His best friend joined in too, at the same time. They shaved each other's heads actually. So that was cute.
That is cute. That's really cute. I know you mentioned in preparation for this interview that you had gone back to a Caring Bridge site or Caring Bridge page that you had made. What can you tell me about that, and how helpful was it to journal for you?
Yeah. So at the time, I did not look at it as journaling. I looked at it as I need to keep family and friends kind of aware of what's going on in this journey and how he's doing, because it does get emotionally exhausting to repeat yourself when you have this big news every day. There's something new, right? And it's tough. You have to call your mom, and you have to call your mother-in-law, and you have to call your sister, and it's too much. And this was just an easier way to do it. So I never thought about it as journaling, but I did, in preparation, as you said, for this interview, I went back to look at everything, and I just thought, wow, I'm glad I did this, because there are some things that I had forgotten about that I could reread, and just also seeing where he was and where we all were emotionally versus where we all are now. And just having that as a reminder that things are a lot better.
That you've grown, each one of you has grown, and you've grown as a family. So yeah, for sure. I can imagine. What about the emotional aspects for Miles? Because, this is something that he's basically had to live with all of his life, and he's had an up and a down road. How has his mental health been, and how has the family's mental health been throughout this journey?
Sure. That's a great question also. And I could talk about this the entire meeting. Miles was blessed with a very laid back personality, and not much bothers him. He's happy-go-lucky, not too much affects him. With that said, I still felt that it was important for him to get therapy prior to his second transplant with the unrelated donor. So we kind of did a pre-therapy, if you will, where I took him. It was a play therapist, and it's a great thing for kids. They have a huge room set up with tons of toys, but it's structured. The kids don't know that, but the therapist knows it's structured. And I just felt like it was important for him to get his feelings out, and also try to understand what was about to happen and what was coming and how to prepare for that. So that was one of the things that we did, was put him into therapy prior to transplant. The hospital also offered psychotherapy, as well as art therapy, massage therapy, music therapy. They offered a lot of different options for kids, because the boredom, can really get to them. They can focus on their pain and suffering way too much. So they offered this, and that was also super helpful. Another thing that we did to prepare for a transplant is we tried to write out a schedule, and I knew full and well that we probably would not be able to stick to it, but we continued to do school. And again, I knew he wasn't going to absorb any information. It wasn't about learning. It was about staying busy and staying focused. And we also just focused on other positive things. So Miles was very into martial arts at the time. So let's do Tai Chi 3 days a week for just 10 minutes. It's just something to look forward to. He really developed a love for art while he was in the hospital. Boredom brings on creativity, right? And we were fortunate enough to have a gentleman at the hospital who was a researcher that donated his time to Miles in teaching him art. And that's when we saw things really blossom for him. And now he's going to school for film and animation. So, and one of the pictures that will be on here is a picture that Miles drew, kind of depicting his journey and how he views it, where he was and where he is now. He drew that in high school when he was running track. That's what that picture on the right side is. And it shows the contrast, even with the colors that he used, right? The gray and the gloomy, and then the colorful. So we just focused on a lot of things to keep him busy. The mental health for the family was tough. I have gone through years of therapy to be able to even sit and talk about this with you. If you would have asked me to do this, Heather, 5 years ago, I would not have been able to do it. It's been a long time. It's hard on your marriage. It's hard on each parent individually. It's hard on your outside relationships. I really, as his mother, I really let this become my identity for a long time, because that's what I did. I took care of Miles, and that's all I would ever talk about, all I would ever think about. And that takes its toll on other relationships. Something that was unsuspecting for us, when Miles got sick again, when he was, 9, our next son, Liam, was, I think, 3 at the time. We really thought that he was too young to understand and absorb what was going on, but we were very wrong. And it was a few years after Miles was well that we really started to see a lot of effects in him and how it affected him. So, seeking therapy for the whole family is extremely important. And I know as parents, it's tough to find the time to do that. But if the hospital offers it to the kids, then chances are they offer it for the parents too. And nowadays with telehealth, you can hop on a telehealth and do some therapy through that, but it's needed. It's really needed, and it's helpful. Maybe not in that moment, but it's a journey, and eventually you'll get there.
I'm glad you said all that, because I think that that's very important. And I think that everybody watching and listening to this who is a parent can put themselves in your shoes and totally can understand what you're saying there for sure. Being a parent of a SCID child does become your identity. And so you're right, it is very important to find something else that to make up your identity. So thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned, the lymphoma that occurred when he was 10 years old, and then that he had another transplant. I know he's 20 now. So what kind of happened between 10 and 20? Was he able to go to school? Take us on that journey.
Sure. So I homeschooled him from 1st grade through 6th grade for health reasons. And so when he received that, the last transplant, and then he received the 2 boosters, he developed grade 5 gut GVH, which I believe is the highest grade that there is. And just like I said, GVHD of the gut. He was in the ICU. He was blasted with steroids. There's a photo that shows what that looks like. And that was very tough for him, right? To look like that and to feel like that. And at that time, he could only walk to the end of our driveway and back. And that's all he could do for the whole day. And even at that, we had to push him. So while he was being blasted with steroids, that negatively impacts your immune system. And he then developed a fungal infection all throughout his sinuses and behind his ear and his mastoid. We were told later that at that point, he had less than a 5% chance to live. I'm glad they didn't tell me that at the time. I probably could have gone the rest of my life without knowing that too, but it just goes to show you that there's always hope. And even when it's that desperate, obviously he was in the ICU for a bit. And, I don't know why he made it. Only God knows that. I'm thankful for it. And it was rough, and it was a lot of work to get him back to where he is. I mean, it's just collective work with everyone. The doctors were great. As I said, our community was great. Our families are awesome. Miles is a great kid. Like, it just, that doesn't mean anything when it comes to why is he here still. But it's just kind of collectively, all of those things were helpful in our journey. And now he was able to go back to school in 7th grade, to public school. And he did very well. He started running track. He became really interested in art. His senior year of high school was COVID, unfortunately. So he did that online. That was terrifying for me at first. And then when he got it and we were all sicker than he was, I realized, okay, he's fine. We moved again for work to another state. We now live in Texas, and we're fortunate to have great doctors here as well. He graduated high school. He's in college. He's into powerlifting now. For his 8-year transplant anniversary, the last transplant, he celebrated by deadlifting 415 pounds. And this year in October, we'll celebrate 10 years since his last transplant.
Wow. What a story. And, that's really why I wanted you to share with us today, because I just wanted to give everybody watching a glimpse into, things may seem rough right now at the time, but boy, they can improve. And he definitely gives you hope, gives everybody watching hope that things can improve for them too. And he just really is a remarkable man, and his journey throughout all of this is just incredible. So you said he's 20. So when he turned 18, did he transition from pediatric care to adult care, or has he been able to stay in pediatric care? I know it kind of varies from center to center and state to state, but I'd like to know what your experience has been.
Sure. We moved here when he was 18 to Texas, and they do have a kind of a transitional clinic for adult care. And the immunologist there is wonderful. She has great reviews. Everyone that sees her loves her, and the other physicians think very highly of her. I, as a mom, I'm too scared. I was too scared to put him into adult care because SCID is not an adult diagnosis, and there are very few adult SCID kids. So there's not a lot known about it in the adult world. So I chose to stick with pediatrics. They tried to get us to move. He also has chronic kidney disease. So even in nephrology, they tried to get him into adult care, but I just wasn't ready for that yet. And I know every center is different, but where we are right now, I was fortunate enough to be able to have that as an option. So right now he's still in pediatrics, and I'm sure that next year they're probably going to approach me again about changing.
Well, and you have to do what you're comfortable with. And you make a very valid point. Our kids really are the ones that are paving the way to show what's going to happen for the adult care, but there aren't a lot ahead of them that have done that. So when you think about all 50 states, they're just, for us as parents, it's very hard for us to feel that comfort and that connection, because think about it. These doctors have known our children since they were babies. And so it's very hard to release that and trust to go with somebody new who doesn't know them. But then how much of the disease do they know? Did they hopefully study more than just a chapter in a textbook? Are we their only SCID patient? It's a lot easier when you're seeing a pediatric immunologist that has, a handful of or more of SCID patients then you feel more comfort. But, you know, I'm in the same boat that you are.
Yes, and Taylor's older.
And Taylor's older. Yes, he's 26 and he's still seeing a pediatric immunologist. So
Yeah.
I'm right there with you.
You know, and what you just touched on, that was hard for us because we have moved around so much to different states, and it hasn't always been for his care. 2 or 3 times it's been for work. So to find a doctor prior to moving, we had to do a lot of speaking with other doctors. Who do you have a relationship with there? Speaking with other moms in the SCID group who live in that area. Who's there that you trust? Who do you know well? Who have you worked with? And so coming to Texas, you know, the doctors that we worked with previously knew the pediatric doctor here quite well. So it made it an easier transition. And, you know, when you develop these relationships, which, as you said, it takes a long time to develop that trust, because that doesn't happen with all of these physicians. That trust, unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. That's with any individual that you encounter in life, but it takes a lot of time, and a lot of different things have to happen for that to fall into place. So that's kind of where we are. So I'm hopeful that the adult care, once we have to transition, it will be just as good as where he is right now.
Me too. You know, and we went through a similar experience when it came time for college too, because you have to think, you know, even though they're doing well, you have to keep some of these things in the back of your mind. Like, what if there was a SCID emergency of some sort, you know, some kind of a health issue? How far away from their treating immunologist are they? You know, if they are on infusions and it's not subcutaneous infusions, is there an infusion center that they can go to? There's all kinds of variables. You know, is it okay for them to live in a dormitory that has other, you know, students in there, or do they have to have their own private room? What about sharing a bathroom? And there's all these things that, you know, these, I don't want to call them obstacles, because they're not obstacles, but all these decisions that have to be made. But thankfully we have 18 years to prepare for that.
Yes, but not too many people think about that until
Right.
that 18th year, right?
So true. Yes, so true. And we experienced it for the first time when we were touring colleges out of state. And then it became a reality, because at that time Taylor was getting IVIG infusions, and it became a reality of, oh, where am I going to get this if I'm out of state? I'm not going to come home to get it. So, oh no. And decisions made, and he found a great school here in Florida to go to. So it's not a negative thing. It just, sometimes you just have to find alternatives that maybe they didn't know were going to be great alternatives at the time, but it turns out that they are in the end.
Right. So. But also that letting go as a parent, that's really tough to do.
It's tough on us, and it's very tough. But something that I overheard Taylor say his freshman year of college, when he came home from school for the first time, I overheard him telling family that he went to college unprepared for what it was going to be like to not have his mom and dad around, helping him make these decisions and helping him, you know, just with the daily, make sure you get, we didn't ever have to make sure he would get up to go to school. He always was able to do that on his own. But you know what I'm saying? Just the reminder of eating and doing your homework and all that kind of stuff. It's just like all of a sudden there's nobody there saying, did you get your homework done? And he was just like, felt unprepared. And so yeah. It's hard because we don't want to smother them.
Right.
So, you know, it's like, where's the give and take there kind of thing. But so to all those of you that are listening, and your children are not of college age yet, word to the wise, start preparing them in advance.
Yes, I did try to get him to be a part of the conversations with the doctors and answer the questions that they were asking himself while I was there to prompt him if needed, maybe around 15, 16 years old, just so he could start learning how to do that. And does he actually know the answers to to any of these questions. And some of them he didn't, because I think he just knew my mom has that taken care of, which is fine when they're kids, right? But I also put together a folder for him to carry with him when he goes to the appointments in college so that he can make sure that he communicates that information that's needed to the new doctors in the area.
Yeah, that's so important. So important. Well, I think that that photo of Miles in his buff, he's looking very, very fit, just is a true testament, like I said, of this journey and how much effort he has put into and the family has put into, but really he has put into getting himself well. So that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. He has really put in a lot of dedication into working out and also choosing healthy foods because of his kidney disease. He does have to be careful with his protein intake, as well as the types of foods that he eats, non-processed foods and such, to keep a healthier immune system. So he really focuses on that, and he's doing great with his food choices. And in college, with what they serve at the halls, that's tough. They don't have the greatest food choices for him. So he's really focused on a whole foods diet and exercising and lifting weights. And he's learning how to do the exercise he's learning how to do in moderation and not to overdo it. He's still figuring that out, but he's focusing on a healthy lifestyle. He has a great attitude. I think even just continuing, for others, continuing mental health after, because the journey, the hardest part of the journey is over, doesn't mean that the mental health stuff doesn't creep up later. There are still triggers later in life. And I think just keeping a healthy lifestyle overall, with what you eat, with working out, with your mental health, who you surround yourself with, your community, things like that is extremely important in continuing to heal from all of this trauma. Sometimes I get asked, oh, so he's healed, everything's good then. I actually get asked that quite a lot. And that's such a tough question to answer. Right now, he's doing well. And I try not to live with the idea of, oh, the other shoe is going to drop or could drop. I try not to live with that. But in reality, it is possible. I try not to let it creep up on my thoughts and in my life. But I don't know how to answer, yeah, he's healed, he's doing great, because the transplant could stop working, at any time. And that's hard and that's scary to think about. I'm hopeful that it won't. And right now we're just enjoying the right now and where he is at the moment. He's doing exceptionally well. And I pray that that continues. But the trauma will never be gone. It can be, you can learn to live with it. And then just being aware that you always need to keep up on those doctor's appointments. Miles has got to keep up on those doctor's appointments and doing the follow-ups each year for all of the different specialties that he needs to have checked after all the chemotherapy, or if, like I said, if the transplant stopped working. Those are all part of the journey as well.
Yeah, it definitely is a lifelong process. It really is. So, and like you said, you're enjoying the highs right now, and hopefully that ride continues on. But he's going to be on top of it and catch it right away if something were to come up. So I think that's a great message. Long-term follow-up is so important.
Yes.
So, well, thank you so much for your time, Angie. I really appreciate you sharing your story and so much of Miles' journey with us, and tell him thank you for letting you share, because I know it's personal for him too, for allowing us to learn and to see the photos of him too. So this has just been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.